and no one's gonna judge.
Connect to the Wi-Fi network. You might want to check the connection settings in the Google Home app.
Hey Google. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie. I am an introverted solo female backpacker here on YouTube to show that you can travel whether you're an introvert, extrovert, and no matter how old you are. In today's video, I am going to answer some frequently asked questions I've been asked about my Australia trip. By now, I have posted all my vlogs from my 2-month backpacking trip through the east coast of Australia, and it's safe to say that I had the absolute best time, and I'm so excited to answer these questions for you. So without further ado, we'll just get into the video and answer some questions for you. Okay, so I went on my Instagram at Katy Sputo to ask if anyone had any sort of questions about Australia and just travel in general. And I have 14 questions that I'm going to answer today, and I will try to do it as quickly as possible. So number one is, how did you go about planning your trip? So I would say this Australia trip wasn't as planned as some people may think. I actually booked my flight to Australia like 3.5 weeks prior to going. And this is just because I had a major foot injury and I wasn't sure if I was gonna be able to go, but I was able to go. So with about, I think it was like just shy of 3.5 weeks, I reached out to Welcome to Travel. If you don't know who they are a travel company. They run tours in Melbourne and also Sydney, and they're also doing tours as well on the West Coast and in the Northern Territory. And while I did not take one of their tours, I did utilize their travel itinerary planning. So I actually worked with Emily, who was incredible, and she helped me really just figure out the pacing of my trip. Now obviously things changed as I traveled. I took out some places, I don't think I really added anywhere, but I took away some places, added some time to other places. But it was a great resource just to figure out the pacing of my trip. Once I kind of knew, okay, this is the rough itinerary of my trip, I was then able to go in and book something. So I didn't book too many things ahead of time. I think this is really going to depend on the time of year you go. Because I was going in the fall, going into winter, I didn't really feel like I needed to book out things crazy in advance. But if you are going in, let's say the spring, summer, you might need to book things like hostels and tours a little bit more ahead of time, but I didn't really feel like I needed to do that. But what I did book ahead of time was my Australia Zoo ticket, my Greyhound bus pass, my Whitsundays tour, which that changed, and also my Fraser Island Gari tour as well, which that also changed. That wasn't my fault, that changed. And then everything else was kind of on an as-needed basis. I was able to ask questions to Emily, so that's kind of how I went about planning it. And then otherwise, I just read a lot of blogs, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I just went onto my Google Maps on my phone and just found interesting places. So that's kind of how I planned it. It was probably the least strictly planned trip I've taken so far, but the more I've traveled, the more I'm realizing I don't actually like having things super planned out. I just like kind of having a rough idea of what I want to do, and then depending on the day, I just wing it. I definitely had some weather issues, like in Noosa, the weather was pretty much crappy. I also didn't have a tour company pick me up, or at least in the right location. They didn't tell me the right location to be. But anyway, that's how I went about planning my trip. This has gone on long enough. If you have further questions about how I plan my trip, feel free to reach out to me in the comments or on my Instagram at Katy Sputo. I'm happy to answer them further. Number 2. How did you save money? How much did you spend or should you bring to Australia? Well, this is going to vary depending on the person. So I have always said I put myself in between a budget backpacker and the most fancy traveler out there. I guess I'm a flash packer. As I've gotten older, I do like still staying in hostels. I got very comfortable with the hostel experience in Australia, but I do kind of like having my own space. So sometimes I'll do private rooms versus other people might not want to do that. They might just really want to stick to a budget. But I did spend a little bit more money on accommodations and sacrifice, you know, I'm not a foodie, so going out and eating is not a big thing for me. But what I will say, I don't feel comfortable sharing the exact amount I spent because I definitely went over budget, but I am happy to share the 3 categories where I spent the most, or maybe I can do top 5. Let's see. So I have my budget app here and I tracked every single thing of spending. So my top, let's just say top 5 categories. Number 1 was accommodation. So my hostels, I stayed in a couple Airbnbs and I think I stayed in 1 hotel motel. Next was travel. So this was my flights, my Greyhound pass I believe was in here. Just kind of more bigger travel expenses. This was pretty, but looking at how much it was pretty much my flight to and from Australia. Number 3 was transportation local. So these are buses, like city buses and trains and Ubers. So that was number 3. Number 4 were activities. These were various tours I went on and just various activities. And number 5 was food. This was grocery shopping. This also included alcohol and going out. So those are my top 5 categories, which doesn't surprise me that those were the top 5. And as to how much money you should bring, whatever you have. I mean, I think depending on if you're on a certain visa, you have to show proof of, I believe, 5,000 Australian dollars, but just bring what you feel comfortable spending / what you have, and just set yourself a budget. And don't be alarmed if you go over budget, because again, like I said, Australia's a very expensive country, but I didn't go so over budget that it was like crazy. So, I mean, you certainly can, but you don't have to. Question number 3 is, what type of visa did you have / did you need a visa? So I entered the country on an ETA, which is like an electronic travel authority visa. Basically, it was 20 Australian dollars. It's valid for a year. I am an American citizen, so certain countries can do this. I will link the Australian immigration site down below so you can look up the visa requirements for your country of origin, your nationality. But yes, I entered just on this visa. Basically, you can apply through an app. I think you have to apply on an app if you can. But it basically gives you a year to use it, and you can enter the country for 3 months at a time. So really, honestly, if I wanted to, I could have entered, stayed 3 months, left the country, and then come back like a couple days later and gotten another 3 months. So that's the great thing with that visa. But the thing that sucks is that if you do want to spend more than 3 months at a time, you can't unless you leave the country and come back in. Now, you can also do a visitor's visa, and a very popular visa is the working holiday or work and holiday visa. Depending on your nationality, it's for ages 18 to 30. Some countries it's 35. I know the UK just increased theirs to 35, but you can basically go to Australia for a year and you can work, and then you can also travel. So it's a great visa. It's something I was actually going to do in 2020 because I turned 30 in 2020, but COVID shut down everything before I could apply. I was just about to apply, and then, yeah, so I missed out on that, and I still regret it to this day. But like I said, I will link the immigration site down below so you can see all the various different visa options and see which one is right for you. Question number 4, tips for hostels I'm scared to stay at one. I completely understand this. Hostels can be overwhelming, especially if you're not used to them or you read things in the news. But basically, my tips for a hostel experience is 1, definitely read the reviews. Go on Hostel World, go on booking.com. You can even do Google reviews, but just read the reviews. See what the vibe is like. For me, I look for a place that's clean, that is social, but not necessarily a party hostel. And it does have some sort of like quiet hours, like at 10, 11 p.m. that it just seems to get a little bit quieter. And then also a kitchen. So I guess that's 4 things that I look for. But you just have to find the things that you prioritize. You might not always go for the cheapest option. And for me personally, that's okay. I don't need to go with the dirt cheap option. because I do have a little bit more money to spend, but I still try to do things on a budget, especially now in this economy with inflation. But yes, just look around, definitely read those reviews and see the type of vibe you want. If you want somewhere that's super quiet, no party, no socialization, find a hostel like that. If you want a little bit more socialization, just look for or search for words like social. You can also look up party in the reviews. Just, yeah, if you don't want a party hostel, just make sure that they say it's social, not a party hostel, or not a party hostel, but still has activities. So that's what I would definitely recommend. I would recommend a social but not party hostel. That's just me. Make sure they have some sort of activities, even if it's just a few days a week, so you can meet other people. And yeah, I mean, if you're scared to stay in one, maybe stay in a private room first just to get the feel, because you can still have the hostel experience even if you're in a private room. Sometimes private rooms will have a bathroom in it, but most of the time it still has a communal bathroom, so you're still mingling with people. Also, there's activities. There's also the communal kitchen. You can still meet people. If you do want to stay in a dorm room, maybe stay in a smaller dorm room first, or like a 4-bed or a 6-bed. Maybe don't go immediately into like a 12-bed room. Personally, I don't even like rooms that big if I can help it, because that's a little overwhelming for me. But just kind of know your limits and just go slowly. You don't have to go like headfirst into the hostel experience. Number 5, was it easy to meet people? Yes, it was very easy to meet people. I would say Australia, out of all the travel I've done so far, Australia was probably the easiest place to meet people. Granted, I did stay in more hostels on this trip than any other trip I've taken, but between the social activities at the hostels and tours I took, it was just very easy to meet people. I also just felt like people were more willing to talk to others. When on other trips I've been to, while there is that, maybe I just haven't gone to the right places, or maybe I just approached my travel wrong. And I do have an upcoming trip here soon that I'm approaching to Europe, that I'm approaching a little bit differently than in my past trips. But yes, to sum it up, yes, it was very easy to meet people. And I guarantee, even me as a very introverted person, I was able to meet a ton of people. And I did come out of my shell a bit, but definitely it is very easy. And you will always have someone to mingle with and make really good friends with when you're traveling. And honestly, I've met some really amazing people I still stay in touch with to this day. Number 6, were you the oldest? Did you feel old? I was not the oldest, but I was certainly older. Did I feel old? 99% of the time, no. I think travel like this appeals to a certain sort of personality or just like vibe. I don't know how to describe it, but someone who's a little bit more youthful, who is kind of, more of a free spirit. And while I was definitely one of the older individuals in hostels, I wasn't the oldest. I met people who were in their 30s, in their even mid to late 30s. So I think it's more of just a mindset thing. 99.9% of the time, my age did not matter. Even if it was brought up, it did not matter. That 0.1% of the time where it did, yes, it was awkward, but we got over it. And it just honestly wasn't a person I would probably associate with outside of my travel experience anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think especially too with some of these working holiday visa age allowance going up, so like the UK just increased theirs to 35, I think you are going to see people who are a little bit older backpacking Australia on these visas. I don't think it's going to be filled all of a sudden with 30-year-olds, but I do think you're going to find some people a little bit older, over 30, doing these because they want to take advantage of this visa that they couldn't up until a couple months ago. So yeah, so did I feel old? No. Was I one of the oldest? Yes, but I wasn't the oldest. Number 7, is there a big drinking party hookup culture? So yes and no. Is there that culture? Yes. I think it doesn't matter where you go, whether you're backpacking in Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, Europe, South America, Central America, I don't think it matters where you go. Backpackers, there is that party, drinking, hookup culture. Now, I would compare it to the culture at colleges and universities. It's there if you want it, but if you don't want it, you don't have to participate. Are a lot of hostel events like revolving around drinking? Yes. You know, I've been to wine and cheese nights. I went to beer pong tournaments that they play with water. You know, I went to trivia nights where the prize was a bar tab, but no one's really pressuring you to drink. So I feel like that's very important. There were many times at night where I went to an event and people were drinking. I might have had like one drink or I didn't drink at all. And there's not times where I had a few more than one drink, you know, so the culture is there, but you don't have to participate. There were a lot of times where I just went back to my hostel room and chilled out for the evening. There were other times when I went out, and sometimes I went out too much, but that was just all kind of part of the experience. But I guess to summarize, if you want to participate in it, you want to be a part of it, you want to go out and party and drink and hook up with people, go for it. Nothing's going to stop you. No one's going to judge you, or at least I shouldn't judge you. If they do judge you, that's a problem. So yes, so my point is you don't have to participate in it, but it's there if you want it. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Number 8, any travel apps you recommend. So I actually want to film an entire video with my favorite travel apps. I've been kind of going through my apps and deleting some and adding some. But for Australia specifically, there are some travel apps that were Australia specific that I had. So I'll share those with you. They're not so much general travel apps. But number 1 was the Australian ETA app. That's where I got my visa from. It's just have it on your phone just in case you need it to show it to anyone. But the visa is attached to your passport, so don't worry too much. Another one I had was the Spaceship Rentals app. This is what I use in Tasmania to find campsites. It was great. I still haven't installed because when I go back eventually, it's just a great resource to have for campsites. I also have like the Qantas app for the airline, a couple of local transit apps like for Melbourne and Brisbane. Also have the GoKey app. Some hostels you have to, which honestly I don't really like this, but you use your key to Bluetooth unlock the door. They're a little finicky. I use it in a few hostels. So you might, I think it's becoming a bigger thing, but anyway, I had it for a few and it can be a little finicky. And then I also have the app for my cell phone provider, which that's another question, which I will go down the line and answer that, but the cell phone provider I use in Australia, I also have their app. And then just kind of in general, you know, I used Hostelworld, Booking.com, Airbnb, Skyscanner, Currency Exchange, etc. But I will go through all those apps in a separate video because I do have a lot of travel apps that I use on a day-to-day basis when I'm traveling and honestly when I'm not traveling. But anyway, so hopefully that answers your question with just some Australian travel apps I used. Number 9, speaking of cell phones, what did you do for your cell phone? So I got a local SIM card. I elected to do Telstra. I picked up my SIM card at the Melbourne airport. At the Melbourne airport, actually like Sydney as well, Telstra doesn't have a kiosk where you could buy the SIM cards like others, like I think Optus and Vodafone, and there's some other providers. You can actually go to a kiosk and buy it and they'll install it, etc. And that's what I did like when I was in Portugal and in the UK. I had Vodafone in Portugal and Spain and EE in the UK, and I just went to a store and they did it, or a kiosk and they did it. But at the Melbourne airport, you just literally go to a vending machine and you buy whichever one you want and it spits out, and then you can easily install it. So I opted for Telstra because I was going to Tasmania, and in my research I found that Telstra had the best service in more remote areas such as Tasmania. Now, if you're only sticking to major cities, you're going up the East Coast, you could certainly do Optus. It's a little bit cheaper, but Telstra worked very well for me. I was very rarely without any sort of service. I think there's only one time in my entire trip where I had no service whatsoever, and that was when I was in Gari, Fraser Island. And even so, there was at one point where I was standing on this beach in one spot and I got one bar of service. So anyway, I definitely recommend it. It's not terribly expensive. It's a little bit, again, Telstra is a little bit more expensive than others, but I do recommend it. And you can use the app to track your data usage. You can also add or buy add-on packs, or after 30 days you could buy more data. So I definitely recommend Telstra, in my opinion. Number 10. What was it like getting sick on your trip? It sucked. Getting COVID on my trip was definitely not in the cards. Am I surprised it happened? No. Listen, I feel like unfortunately, everyone's gonna get COVID at least once. And I don't say that flippantly. I'm just very surprised it took me so long to get COVID. Because in Australia, that was the first time I ever had it. I was very lucky. I had a fairly mild infection, and yeah, I mean, it sucked, and I was miserable for a few days, and I kind of, even though I was better, like I was testing negative, I still had like brain fog and the cough for a few weeks. But yeah, I mean, what was it like getting sick? It was not ideal. It sucked, and I had to change my plans. I had to change my Whitsundays boat, which actually ended up working out very well, and I met some incredible people on that boat. But yeah, I don't recommend it if you can help it. But yeah, I mean, luckily I was in a very good place to isolate. So yeah, but that's my thoughts. It sucked. Number 11. What would you change about your trip? If you were to do it again, what would you change? There's not a ton I would change on the trip. Obviously, I would not have gotten COVID if I had a magic wand. Things I would change. I think there are certain parts I wouldn't have maybe gone out as much, like, or at least on consecutive days like I did, because I really wore myself down. In an ideal world, again, if I never got COVID, I would have spent more time on Magnetic Island. That's something I had to sacrifice time there in order to isolate for COVID. I would have spent another day in Melbourne. I think I shortchanged myself there. If I had more time, I definitely would have spent more time in Tasmania. But I'm satisfied still with the amount of time I did have there. But definitely want to return in the future. And I mean, maybe I wouldn't have gone to I would probably, if I were to do it again, I wouldn't go to Newcastle again. I don't regret going, especially because I met someone there who's become a good friend of mine. But I don't think I would go back there. Next trip, I might go to Surfers Paradise, even just for a couple days, because I did skip it. There are some other places along the East Coast I want to go to. I wouldn't say I would change the trip I just took, because I really do think it was a great, it was the standard backpacker route, but I think it was a great trip and I wouldn't change that. But yeah, I definitely, there's things if I were to go back, I would do differently. Also, I would not have stayed, if I could change anything, I also would not have stayed at that hostel, the first hostel I stayed at in Sydney. That was terrible. Yeah. And I'm still never, well, I'm not going to say the name of it on here, but you might be able to figure it out on my Instagram. Number 12. What was your favorite place you visited? That is difficult because I had a lot of places I loved. If I had to say my favorite places, definitely Tasmania just as a whole. That was probably one of the best weeks of my life. I would say most surprising place was Byron Bay. I absolutely loved Byron. I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I absolutely loved Byron Bay. Magnetic Island was pretty cool. I did like that. I loved Bondi Beach so much I went back there at the end of my trip. Yeah, I mean, there's so many places I loved, but I would say, yeah, those were kind of like the highlight. If, like, just on the spot, if I had to say, those would be my favorite. But probably the entire trip was probably Tasmania, because it was just incredible. And I really felt like I was in my element there, and I want to go back right now. Number 13. What are/is the biggest lesson or lessons you learned? I actually sat down and thought about this question because I want to make sure I answered it right. And there were 3 things I have on my phone here, but there were 3 things I would say were the biggest lessons I learned. So number 1 was adaptability. I think I've gotten better with this with age, but I think this trip definitely furthered that and really in my brain solidified that, okay, I am definitely a more adaptable person. And what I mean by that, like on this trip, there are certain things I had to be flexible on. One was the camper van issues. When my first camper van, Galileo, had issues with the brakes, I had to adjust my itinerary to get a new vehicle. And I was pretty calm actually through all that. And I was like, wow. I surprised myself on how calm I was. Also, getting COVID. I mean, getting COVID was certainly something I had to be very flexible and adaptable to. I would say I was a little bit more emotional during that time, but also I was sick and I was feeling really terrible. So I think that I get a pass on that. But even so, I was able to still go on the Whitsundays and still make the most out of my trip once I tested negative. And, you know, I was still able to roll with the punches with that. Another lesson in adaptability was my flight cancellation. If you saw my last vlog in Sydney, my flight back to the US was canceled. I had no way to get home, and I found out about 12 hours before I was supposed to fly back to LA and then LA to Orlando. And with that first leg of the flight being canceled, I wasn't going to make my connection. So anyway, I had to be really adaptable to, you know, get home. And granted, I really wasn't that upset that my flight was canceled. Oh no, 2 extra days in Australia that the airlines didn't end up having to pay for. And to be fair, Delta did reimburse me finally for the additional expenses. So thanks to Delta. But yes, that was definitely a big lesson I learned, just in adaptability. Number 2 is just confidence and sticking up for myself. I would say my confidence has taken a hit a little bit since coming back, but even so, I would say I'm more confident now as a person versus before my trip. And I do stick up for myself more. This isn't in a cocky way, but I know my worth. And I know whether that comes to relationships or jobs or whatever, I know my worth. And I don't think I'm the best person out there. I don't think I'm this hot shit, but you know, I do know that, you know, I have the confidence to know that I do have something to offer the world. And yeah, so that was another lesson I learned. And number 3 was age is just a number. Again, this is also something I'm still becoming more comfortable with, but really, age is just a number. I have more youthful energy now at 33 than I did when I was 23. So really, age, while yes, you might start to slow down as you get older, I hate when people say, oh, as soon as you hit 30, you become a grandma. That's like not the case. I still have like wicked insomnia. I can still go out. I know my drinking limits now. And just in general, my limits that I didn't 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, I think as you get older, you get a little wiser, but I'm still young, you know? I hate it when people think 30 is just this really old number, because at 33, I have still been a child longer than I've been an adult. I am still figuring out things. And 30s, your 30s are still young. So it's a weird age. I feel like your 20s and 30s are a really weird kind of 2 decades of your life, because everyone's kind of going in all these different directions. But it really is still young, and age is just a number. Those are the 3 lessons I learned. Adaptability, confidence / sticking up for myself, and age is just a number. And the final question is, would you go back? Absolutely. And I am planning on going back to Australia soon. I'm not going to say when yet, but I'm definitely in the very early preliminary stages of starting to plan my trip. I do want to do parts of the East Coast again. I probably want to do the entire East Coast again, at least my next trip. But there are parts of it I want to do. I want to go back to certain places. I want to go explore other places. But I also want to explore other parts of Australia. I want to go to Western Australia. I want to explore the Northern Territory. I want to go to Adelaide because I was not able to go to Adelaide, which is in Southern Australia. I might even want to go to the Capital Territory. I'm not 100% sure, but I might as well if I want to visit everywhere in Australia. But yes, I will be going back for sure. I feel like this is on any trip, but I do feel like I left like a little bit of my heart in Australia, but I also feel like that in other countries, like in Poland and Portugal, in the UK. Like, I do feel like when you travel, you kind of do leave a little bit of like your heart in certain places that you're really connected to, and Australia was one of those places, so definitely will be going back. But that's it. If you have any questions that I did not address, pop them down below in the comment section. I will be sure to answer them. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Katy Sputo. I am so happy to talk about anything Australia related or anything travel related, really. So feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, you can follow me on my social media channels on Instagram at Katy Sputo, on TikTok at Katy Does Travel. I also have a blog, katydoestravel.com. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to be notified when there are other videos I'm trying to post. Now that I have all the vlogs out and I do have a trip coming up, I'm trying to post just once a week versus twice a week. I think that's a little bit more sustainable for me. But if you enjoy travel content for introverts or for people who are traveling in their 30s but are not doing the ultra exclusive luxury vacations, give me a follow and subscribe and follow my journey. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. Thank you again so much for watching, and remember to wander far and wander often. Bye!